When we transition out of the game, it's hard, right? We lose our identity. We lose who we are. We don't know who we are. We don't know where we fit in. We don't know what we bring to the table. We totally lose a part of us, and a part of us dies. And when I had Angie on my podcast, I don't know, it was a month or two ago, her message resonated with me to the point that we were probably in the middle of it. And I wrote at the top of my sheet that I wanted her to come and speak because of her journey, what she's been through, how she navigated her career loss after she put so much time into what she did. And then she lost it all, and how she lost her identity and how she brought it back. She's written a book, and she's going to talk a little bit about it. It's on the screen right there. And we'll talk about it some more, fellas. But this was a no-brainer for me because she spoke right to my heart and right to my soul. And all I could hear was, this lady needs to speak to your brothers. And so with no further ado, Miss Angie, I want to turn it over to you. I want to welcome you to the group.
Welcome, Angie.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It's so weird when Chuck asked me to join and share my story. I was like, you really think a bunch of hockey players are going to care what this 53-year-old woman has to say? And don't hate me. I've never, ever in my life been to a hockey game. I don't know how this has happened. I love sports. We live in Kansas City, so we're huge Kansas City Chiefs fans, but it is on my list to do. So I'm embarrassed to say that, but I'm super happy to be here talking to you tonight. I want to talk about the identity crisis that we all feel when we lose something so close to us that has basically defined our lives. And when that's gone, how to handle that emotional fallout. It's difficult. So let me just tell you a little bit about me. I spent more than 25 years building a successful career in PR, marketing, and corporate comms. I've worked for companies like Sprint, T-Mobile, Hallmark. I was a partner at an international public relations agency, Fleshman Hillard, and my career was on the rise. I just was focused my whole career being successful, climbing the corporate ladder, being like a partner or a senior vice president or a high management level position. And I was the primary earner in our family up until I had a severe stroke that took me out of my career. I've always been a super high achiever. I've run 4 marathons in my life. So anything I do, I have to go to the ultimate extreme. And that's just always the way I've been. And I'm a wife. I'm a mom of 3 grown kids. I'm now an author. I'm just about to publish my 5th book, and it's about resilience. That's it. And I'm also a speaker, like tonight. And then I'm a 2-time stroke survivor. And I also call myself a recovering perfectionist because I don't think it's a good thing to be a perfectionist. But at the age of 46, this was 6 years ago, I couldn't get up one morning. I'd gone to bed the night before, just like normal. In the morning, I woke up to try to get up and take a shower and go to work. And I couldn't get out of the bed. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get out of the bed. I just couldn't really move. And I was making noises. I was trying to clear my throat. I felt like I had a frog in my throat. And I was kind of shaking because I was trying to propel myself out of the bed, I guess. And I woke up my husband and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to get up and take a shower." And he said, "You sound drunk. Are you drunk?" And I'm like, "Well, it's 6:30 in the morning. I'm probably not drunk." And he got up because he said, "You don't sound right." He got up, he turned on the light, and he looked at me and he said, "Okay, the left side of your face looks like it's melting off. I think you're having a stroke. I'm going to call 911. And I said, "No, don't call 911. I'm sure I'm fine." I mean, I was a healthy 46-year-old in the prime of my life, had never had a health problem ever before. And so it just didn't compute. I thought maybe I was still half asleep or something. Long story short, it was a massive ischemic stroke. I had 2 clots, one in my neck and one in my brain. And so I had to be rushed to the hospital for a medical thrombectomy. So they take a laser guided scope up through the artery in your groin, all the way up into the brain, poke through the clot, and then pull it out. And I was awake for this entire surgery. I don't remember every detail, but I do remember at one point my head was throbbing. And I said, my head hurts really bad. And they said, "Well, because we're inside your brain right now retrieving the clot." And then the next thing I remember, I was in the ICU, the neuro ICU, waking up, and they were asking if I could move my left side. And I was able to move my arm. I couldn't move my hand yet or anything, my fingers or fine motor skills, but I was at least able to lift my arm when an hour before I couldn't move anything on the entire left side of my body. So that is what happened to me. Now, fast forward a few months, I tried to go back to work in corporate communications. I had just finished writing my first book. It was a book about marketing to Gen Z, a generation that I was fascinated with. And I'd done a ton of research and I was so excited to have this book come out. And then I was supposed to travel the world and start speaking about this book and talking to other marketers about how to market to Gen Z. I had so much passion for this. But when I got back to work, I realized that the words on the page just weren't making as much sense to me. I mean, I could read them. The words themselves made sense, but I couldn't quite structure them in a sentence that made sense. As I was trying to edit my book that I just written, I couldn't make the edits that I normally would have been able to make very easily. It's just my brain wasn't working right. And what that did was it triggered horrible anxiety and depression. And what I found out later is that I didn't have cognitive deficits from the stroke, but I had already started experiencing signs of anxiety and depression. So anxiety and depression are very, very common among stroke survivors. It's a biochemical change in the brain. The unfortunate thing is with stroke survivors, suicide rates are higher than the general population because these conditions are so prevalent, but nobody's talking about them. I couldn't find any resources about it when I was struggling and going through it. So that's why I wrote my first book, because I was like, okay, well, nobody else is doing it, so I'm going to write about it because this sucks. So I had to go out on disability 3 times in a row because I just kept trying to go back to work and it just wasn't working. And then the anxiety and depression wreaked havoc on my life and really became so debilitating that I would find myself basically in a puddle at the bottom of the stairs. I could not function. I couldn't get myself out the door sometimes. I had always been such a high performing, energetic, positive person. To go from that to basically flatlining within weeks was, I can't even put it into words. It was the most difficult thing I've ever had to go through in my entire life. What I thought at the time was that I would never be able to go back into communications again, because if you can't work with words, and you can't speak very well because my speech had been impacted. And so for me, I was just like, okay, I'll never be able to work in communications again. And actually, my doctor even told me she didn't want me to go back to such a high stress, high pressure job because she said, you've had 2 warning signs, because at that point I had had 2 strokes. She said, you've had 2 warning signs. It's going to kill you next time. You can't go back to such a high pressure job. And with that, I felt this huge, deep sense of loss. I was afraid. I was angry. And I had some regrets. Have I done the right thing with my career? Should I have been going down a different path? I don't know. But I know you all can relate when your professional career is over. You have these questions in your mind. How am I going to support myself? Who am I now? And these are the deep existential questions. Who am I? What do I really want? And then we might ask ourselves, what do I have to offer the world now? And what's my purpose? I spent days and days questioning my life's purpose when I couldn't work anymore. I was lucky. I was a mom. I was married. I had a lot going for me, a lot, but I just couldn't see it. I just didn't feel like I had a purpose. My kids were a little bit older, so they didn't need their mommy. I didn't have a firm grasp on what my purpose was because I had always been so focused on my job and so focused on success that I never took time to see some other opportunities in my life. But really, really struggled with what my purpose was. And I know you all have been there, or I assume you've all been there. There's good news and bad news. So nothing in life lasts forever. That's the bad news. The good news is also that nothing in life lasts forever. And there's never been a storm in the history of the world that lasted forever. And I wish I could go back to the night that I almost took my life. I'm going to tell you, when you were talking at the beginning of the call about some of the friends you've lost and reaching out to people, yes, that's very, very important. But when you're in the middle of a mental health crisis, your brain is lying to you. It's telling you that the world would be better off without you, that your loved ones would be better off without you, that you're not worth anything. It's telling you to kill yourself. It's telling you that this is the right choice. So it's easy to, from the outside looking in, going, why would they do that? That was a selfish act, or they have so much to live for, but their brains are not chemically right at that moment. They're lying to them, and it's almost impossible not to believe those lies and not to take action on it. I guess the thing that stopped me that night, I just had this voice in the back of my head that said, this is not your legacy. This is not your legacy to take your life. I don't know where it came from. You could say it was God. You could say it was the universe. I don't know, or it's my subconscious, but I just kept saying it's not your legacy. But I wanted to swallow all of my pills and just end the pain because it was horrendous. One of the things I learned to get out of it, and I had to go through a ton of therapy. I had to be hospitalized twice in mental health facilities because it got so bad, and I did have a plan for taking my life. I was going to take all of my pills and end it all and be out of pain. Luckily, my family stepped in because they've seen mental health issues in our family before. They knew how to jump in and help mitigate it, and took me to be evaluated at a mental health facility. And we thought at the time that they would probably say, okay, we'll enroll you in our intensive outpatient program, which was it's like a 3 days a week, 3 hours at a time kind of thing. Instead, they admitted me to the hospital because I was in such a crisis. And those places are only meant to get you through the crisis. They're not meant to cure you. They're just meant to keep you alive and hopefully set you up with some resources for when you leave to be able to get help for yourself. So the first mental health hospital I was in, it was so scary and it was so lonely being there that I just played the game to do whatever I had to do to get out, right? So I was following doctor's orders. I was going to all the group sessions. I was playing the game to get out, but I wasn't feeling better. I was kind of putting on a mask because I have never had problems like this before. I just kept thinking that I'm broken and that I don't belong here. And so I did everything I could to get out. So I was out after 5 days. And the plan was I was supposed to go to their intensive outpatient program 3 days after my release because they couldn't get me in any earlier. There wasn't an opening any earlier for their intensive outpatient program. Problem was, for that 3 days, there was no real plan for how to handle me. And so between hospitalizations is when I nearly took my life because it just seemed so bleak. And I was so scared because it was like, what the hell is happening to me? This is not who I am. And I had to be hospitalized again. And that next time I stayed a few days longer, realized that I was there to get some help, and I accepted the help. And I think that's key is once you go, okay, this is not cool. This is not the way my brain is supposed to work. Something's happening to me and I need help. It's just like if you had cancer, you would probably be okay, go get chemotherapy and take whatever medicines they tell you, because that's what you need to get better. There's no difference with mental health. When you have disease of your brain and your mental health is failing you, you have to get help. It's hard to know when to reach out to somebody when you're in the middle of the crisis. It's easy to say, why didn't they reach out? Why didn't they ask for help? And I'm not a man, so I don't know. As a woman, maybe I have it a little easier because we can cry and we're not called babies or whatever it is. We've always been allowed to express our emotions. So I don't envy you not being able to do that openly. And honestly, it's doing a disservice to human beings not to be able to express and feel our emotions. I won't go into all the therapies I had, but after a long time, I did learn how to accept my negative emotions. So it's easy to have some limiting beliefs about ourselves when something we love so much is gone. But if you can reframe your thoughts from something like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not as talented as I used to be, I'm not as strong as I used to be, I'm not making as much money as I was before. If you can learn to reframe it and look at the opposite side of it. So what good can come out of it? Because there's something good that can come out of every situation. It's hard sometimes to find the good or the silver lining, but if you look back at every hurdle you've had to conquer in your life, write down every single thing you've ever overcome, and then one good thing that came from it. And I bet you can do it. And now is no different. So what good can come out of it? Ask yourself things like, well, you have more time with your family now, have more time with your kids. Can you start a business, or can you go travel the world and do something adventurous? What can you do now that you have more time on your hands? And for somebody like me, I don't like having time on my hands. I like to be busy. I like to be doing stuff. So if I'm not busy, my brain starts to grab hold of that and then it just wreaks havoc. But it's important to slow down, to think about really what can you do now that you have some time to just reframe those thoughts instead of ignoring the thoughts. And then be kind to yourself. There's lots of different ways you can be kind to yourself. Exercising regularly. It's not only good for your physical health, it's really, really important for your mental health. I learned things like how to meditate and how to practice mindfulness. Earlier, somebody on the call said something about gratitudes. And I take it you had a call or meeting about gratitudes. One thing I learned how to do in this process, and I'll share it with you now. And I also share it with my life coaching clients because it's really helpful. So every morning, first thing I do when I wake up, well, I have a big glass of water. And then I do 10 minutes of meditation or mindfulness. For me, mindfulness comes about when I'm able to meditate. I do guided meditations. So at least 10 minutes of guided meditation. And then I write down 10 gratitudes and 10 self-affirmations or I am statements. Like I am strong, I am worthy, I am smart, whatever you can think of that would be self-affirming to you, because you're reprogramming the thoughts in your brain, because our brains believe what we tell them. Our brains don't know the difference between what's true and what's false. Even if you don't quite believe them, tell them to yourself anyway, because your brain will hear that. And the more you repeat the positive affirmations, the more your brain will start to believe it. And then the more you will manifest it. It absolutely works. And it's crazy because my 10, 10, 10s in the morning, I became so addicted to them that I was starting to do 30 minutes of meditation. When you're writing out your gratitudes and your self brags, it's okay if day to day they're the same over and over again, because what that means is you're repeating it and you're telling your brain over and over, and you're course correcting some of the negative thoughts that are in your brain.
Just a quick question, Angie. Making observations from the time that guys retire, where it's the certain length of time that seems to be pretty consistent to get, either come out of the weeds or really take a turn for the worse. Do you have a time frame just in your mind about when you first lost your career to the time that you had mentally sort of overcome the worst of the worst?
Yeah, it probably took me 2 years. I'm still a work in progress, but it took a few years. It took a lot of trial and error with different medications, because a lot of the medications I was on after the stroke were giving me horrible side effects. And that just made everything worse. And it's easy to want a quick fix for sure when you're in horrible anxiety or depression or a deep, dark place. You want a quick fix. Had I had my 10 mental health hacks book with me, it would have helped me a lot. And I would have probably been able to get through things a little faster. But I had to pick up these things along the way through intensive outpatient programs, through one-on-one therapy. It took a while. But it also took me going back to work in a communications job, not loving it, not connecting with people I was working with, because I felt like I just wasn't getting fulfillment out of the stuff I used to get fulfillment out of. And I just wasn't as driven because my doctor had told me to slow down. And then I would leave a job because I didn't like my boss or didn't feel like it was fulfilling. And then this latest one of just getting laid off back in September, that was a sign from God. That was a sign that that's not what I'm supposed to be doing anymore. But it probably was 2 years before I felt like, okay, I'm not going to slip back into that dark place.
It's really interesting that you say that, because we have a ton of guys on here that tell their story, and the common denominators and the consistencies in people's stories is pretty staggering. And I can tell you right now that from the time that most guys come on here, from the time that they retire, most stories that we've heard are in between 2 to 3 years, where the worst of the worst is when they've needed to weather it, and they've been able to, once they've been able to breach those first 2 or 3 years, they've been able to make a difference in a positive way in their lives and get over some of the big mental humps. So I find it interesting that even though our careers were, very opposite, that there's a similarity between those two things there.
I mean, I had friends tell me that I would get through that season of my life, and people would say, this is just a season. And I'm like, I hate this season. I don't want to be in this season. When is it going to end for me? It's so long and I couldn't see the end. But the more you have people telling you that, the easier it gets and you start to believe it after a while.
That was a great question. And Angie, thank you for sharing that, and Scorsese, for bringing that to the awareness, because I think we've talked many times, individually and maybe even on this call, how do we help guys that are playing now not go through the things that we're going through and not be in the positions that we were in? And I think that's tremendous knowledge right there that we can share with some of the guys that are coming up behind us, right? That there's this 2 to 3 year window. Buckle up and just know that it's coming. And here's some tools to help you. And then get on this call, connect with people.
And it's one of the things that they say, don't be afraid to talk about it. Talking about it's not going to make somebody take their life. It's not going to put an idea in their head. Talking about it lets it become part of the conversation. And then they're not going to be so embarrassed by it if something happens to them. Because it was very embarrassing. Honestly, I was so embarrassed and my ego was so involved in the whole thing. I'm mad at myself now that I didn't want anyone to know. But now I scream it from the highest mountaintops.
Anybody else got any questions or comments to add? Dino?
I just want to say thanks,
Mike?
Angie.
Yeah.
Yeah, just thank you very much for taking the time on behalf of all of us. Thank you for doing that. It means a lot to us. And if we could just touch one person every time we chat, which I'm sure you did tonight, we're doing what we're supposed to do. So thank you.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. It's been awesome being here.
Absolutely amazing, Angie. And thank you. I'm so grateful that you took me up on this, because it was absolutely incredible.